Hi, and welcome back to the Global Holistic Coaching Podcast. This is the conversation continues. Today, we're tackling a big one. We're going to start the conversation about grief, how we process grief, how we move through grief, and how eventually we can heal through grief. Okay, so in my practice, I have to admit, I think one of the hardest areas I have for me personally working with other people on in mental health is processing grief because it's one of those things that no matter how hard you try to explain, no matter how hard you try to come up with something that makes sense about why we love and lose, we can't get there. It's
Right.
something very human about it. It's very much something that we know we are all going to experience one way or another. We know that life is temporary. We know that everything is impermanent, and yet it hurts all the same, and probably the best thing that I have used in talking about grief, and I think this is a perfect way to start this conversation today, is I had been working with a client for over a year on her pain for the loss of her mom and her father. They both passed away, unfortunately, unexpectedly. And she had sent me a meme, and we've talked about it on this podcast before, and I'm actually going to add it. And the meme is three jars. And in the first jar is a black ball, and it's small, and it says people think that we grow, that as time goes by, our pain when we lose someone shrinks. And the next picture, the ball is the same size, but the jar is bigger. And it says, but pain doesn't shrink, we grow around it. And then the third one is a big jar, and the ball is the same size. And she had written me a really nice thank you message with that. And I will share that because I think that is exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about grief. And I use that for PTSD as well when we talk about how to process trauma, because it's really the same thing. And grief, when we lose somebody, can be traumatizing as well. So there's often that overlap, which complicates it.
Yes.
Because it's not just the pain of loss. Sometimes it can be traumatizing. So I love that imagery too, of how we think that the pain shrinks. We think that over time it will get, smaller, it will disappear. And the things that happen to us that are hard, they don't. We have no choice. We have to grow around our pain, right? So I think that's a perfect place to start today when we talk about this topic, because it is such a difficult topic.
It is a great place to start. As you were talking, I was thinking, you know, I remember, you sharing that with me, and I wished I had had that 30 years ago because I was, taught that, eventually the pain, goes away, and it certainly does. It does become more manageable. I think I will say it that way. But what I really found to be true is what you just said, Gina, is that we grow around it. And I think that is the perfect place to start. You know, what I'd like to offer right now and move from there is that everybody grieves differently.
Hmm.
I think that was a real big for me because, I had a life altering change. And it was, when my mom passed, I was 30, and she was my world. I mean, I was blessed with an amazing mom. And I really felt she wasn't just my mom, she was my best friend and my go-to, my person. So, gee, you kids were small. And yeah, I felt like there was something wrong with me
Hmm.
because I grieved for so long. And, people actually said there was something wrong with me, that I should have been past it at certain points. And so I just want to share with everyone that it's very personal, and it's individual for each person. So however you're grieving, there's nothing wrong with you. And I think that it's important not to avoid your feelings of grief, even though they're painful, not to try to suppress them. So I think I'm going to start with like accepting and validating your feelings. And I think it's real important not to go to any kind of substances to numb the pain, because, as we learn, feelings are energy. There's an energy of emotion, and there's a saying, you don't feel, can't heal. And
Mhm.
so if we try to numb our feelings, it's like postponing it. Or, I heard one teacher say it's like locking a visitor in a door in a room and locking the door and not letting that visitor out. Like feelings that you don't feel, it's like you're locking them away. And then oftentimes they will try to, I'll say, escape or move in sometimes really inappropriate ways and in inappropriate times. So learning how to feel your feelings and know that it does become more manageable, and most important, who you become through the grief uh,
Mhm.
can be uh, can be an incredible process, even though it's not pleasant. You can become so much more loving, kind, compassionate, forgiving, qualities that can really shape and affect the rest of your life. So I think, that I'm throwing in right now uh, the understanding that everybody grieves differently, and it's
Mm.
to be present with your feelings and to feel your feelings. I can keep going. I'll keep going, but
Yeah,
unfortunately, I have a lot of experience with this. So
yeah, it's one of those areas you don't want to have a lot of
I know
experience,
exactly,
right?
exactly. I wish I didn't. Yeah.
Yeah, makes us better at our jobs.
Yeah.
Um, as you were just talking, and I was thinking about you have to feel it to heal it, and how we, people, we tend to very much resist unpleasant feelings, and
Yeah.
I can't think of a more unpleasant feeling than being in grief and that loss, right?
Of
And so
course.
it makes sense to want to avoid it. It makes sense to want to tuck it far away, deep down inside, put it in a jar, put the lid on it and not look at it. But you're absolutely right. It will pop out. And, I do work with clients who have repressed their pain and their grief, and it can come up in other areas of your life. It's like that whack-a-mole game where you push one big feeling down and then all of a sudden now you have anxiety. And then I love that you brought up trying to pay attention to what you're using to cope with the symptoms of grief, because we can take the pain down a little bit, let's say with alcohol for about 20 minutes. But when that serotonin and dopamine boost is gone, what do? We have to keep chasing that, right? And that's how
Yeah.
substance abuse, we know that research shows substance abuse is very much linked with trauma, and that people who experience trauma and have PTSD are very likely to become addicted to substance because of that cycle. So it's not only important to validate, define almost the pain that you're feeling, but to maybe even give yourself permission, or even, I know this sounds weird, but with my clients, we'll set times to allow the pain to come up and process, like, a weekend, like this weekend, I'm gonna go into my grief. And the reason why we do that is because I think a lot of us have a fear that once we unlock Pandora's box, we're not going to be able to
Right.
put it back in. And so it's like trying to get through the day sometimes. It's like, well, I can't feel my feelings now because I got to take the kids to school. I have to get them ready. And I can't feel my feelings now because now I have to go to work and I have this really important meeting. And then I can't feel my feelings now because I'm coaching a soccer game after work, right? And so I understand that thinking. And so instead of working against it, almost compartmentalizing it in a way of saying to your grief, like, I see you, I know you're there, and I'm going to honor you and set time to be in that grief. And I know this is a gross analogy and I've used it before, but this is the best analogy I can think of in this space when I work with grief, just watching it and having experienced it myself. It's almost like food poisoning because nobody wants to throw up, right?
Right.
And we're
Right.
like, try to avoid it, try to avoid it, try to avoid it. But then when we throw up, we feel better. And I do find that grief, especially that first year or so, it can feel like a tsunami and it comes in waves. So a
Yes.
big tsunami might come and you're trying to push it down, you're trying to push it down, you're trying to push it down, but then you will just explode and you might cry for 3 hours, but then you will feel better. And I will say this, that as time goes on, the duration of the pain, the level of the pain, and how long you're in it will become less. And the reason why I say it that way is because oftentimes time is the missing ingredient in processing any big life event.
Yeah. You got to be patient with yourself.
Yeah, right. And so we want this magic bullet. We want to just get through it and not feel our feelings and just be on the other side of it. But time is often the missing ingredient. We have to allow enough time to go by to build that bridge to the bigger version of ourselves and do this work.
Yeah. And you know, I like that you said use the term like waves because it's really weird that you have good days and bad days. And it's, you know, when you have the good days and then you have the bad days and you think, oh no, I'm going backwards, you're not.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of it. You know, it's part of the journey, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was told, and this was extremely helpful for me, that when you feel like you're regressing, when you know when the pain like comes back and maybe it's even been months or years, you're not going backwards. I was told that, you know, the brain is actually miraculous when it comes to like protection and giving you what you can handle when you can handle it. And whoever, I want to give credit, but I'm sorry, I don't remember. There's been so many teachers along the way, but whoever said to me,
Mm-hmm.
when those waves come back, it just means that your mind got stronger and now you're able to heal and feel that next layer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so your mind was protecting you and you went so far, and then it came around again because now you can handle it. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, okay. And I did, I swear I found it to be true. You know, so recognizing, you know, that it's normal to have those ups and downs. And the other thing too is really important. Please get support.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's just so much harder to try to go through it by yourself. And you know, whether it's a support group or a therapist or a coach or someone that you can talk to. And I
Mm-hmm.
know in the beginning, I felt like I could get through it. I was a strong woman. People all my life came to me for help and advice, and it wasn't until I started working with a therapist and
Mm-hmm.
started to really get myself involved with personal growth. For me, it was also Eastern philosophy, yogic path, and you know, different teachers that really helped. But in the very beginning, I was so resistant. And you know, my thoughts were there's nothing that anyone can say to me
Mm-hmm.
going to, you know, that's going to bring my mother back.
And that's true.
And that is true. And you know, it was really until I just said, let me just see. And now through over, you know, decades, and I've offered to people, please get into a support group or speak with somebody. And, you know,
Sure.
I work a lot with people grieving, and it makes all the difference. It makes all the difference.
And you know, I just want to add to that and say it's often not one person, it's a team of people. So it's not, you know, well, I'm talking to my family member, so I'm good. It's I'm talking to my family member and I'm seeing a therapist and I'm talking to a spiritual coach
Right.
or a minister or a life coach for or an existential therapist on this. And I'm in a support group. You know, it's an and situation, especially depending on the level of the grief and who you've lost. And complicated grief is its own classifiable mental health issue, right? So you do need treatment once you get into complicated grief to help get out of it. And there are people who specialize in that. So and it's funny, right? Because and this is the way I think about loss in general. It's like it's inevitable, and yet it's the one thing we are all unprepared for.
Right.
And right, it's like for every single person who experiences it, the rug is pulled out from underneath you because it's not, we don't really normalize this. We don't really talk about it in our culture. So we are very much unprepared to handle this when it happens. We don't have these conversations ahead of time. That's why it is important to be talking about this. And when we experience a big change, and I'm gonna change the word loss to change because what happens when we lose somebody or and by the way we grieve our marriages when they end, we sometimes grieve our
Thank you,
jobs when we
Phil.
get fired,
Yes, yes,
right? It's like
absolutely.
it's not
It's
right, it's
not.
not just
Yes. death. There's different ways to experience loss. And I love that you're saying this. This can, by the way, be a podcast in itself. Like
Mm,
the the trauma that's not really addressed or considered trauma when it is,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
losing a job can be traumatizing.
100%.
Yeah, yeah, or moving.
Mm-hmm,
Moving can be traumatizing. So
mm-hmm.
I'm so glad you brought that up. And we will let's do a podcast on the different levels of trauma. Yeah,
And then also too, I think that that next podcast, so we'll say this is part one of this discussion, right? And
yeah,
part two will be two of how do you become that jar? How do you grow around that grief and that pain, right? Because we opened up with that example of, the
yes.
doesn't get smaller, you get bigger. Okay, but how? So part two, we will talk about the how that you grow and also the different levels of loss and how we experience that over a lifetime and how we do have to grieve not just the people that we lose, but also sometimes it's our identity. Sometimes it's, that we find out someone we love is having an affair, and that can feel just as painful as a death, right? And so when we're in this space of allowing our feelings to come up, and also I like the reframe of thinking about it as change and starting now, because you can play defense, I think, on this somewhat. I mean, there's going to be an element that no matter what, there will be things that happen in your life that are going to knock you down and take your breath away. That is just, I'm sorry for all of you listening. I am so sorry. I wish I could take that away from you, but I can't. The element of prep work that I feel like we can do when we play a little defense is when we get into a place of acceptance of impertinence. And that can help us really in the moment, it can help us enjoy the time we have with each other, right? And it can help us understand that I have a job that I love, but it's not who I am, for example, or I'm in this relationship and I'm walking beside somebody, but I may not be tomorrow for whatever reason. So today I'm going to enjoy the time I have with this person. And when we start to shift that perspective, I think it can help us. And when we start to think about loss in terms of change and a new chapter, that can help us get into the headspace of the part two of this conversation of growing around the loss.
You know, I'm just thinking of something so beautiful, and it's in Japan. There, they have this way that if they break a vase, in
Mm,
America we throw the vase out, but if they break a vase, they glue it back together. But they glue it back together with solid gold.
hmm
So it accentuates the break, it accentuates the cracks because they believe that it's the breaks that make it more interesting and more beautiful. And it's a metaphor for life, and if we can learn to heal and embrace our breaks, but
hmm
line them with gold by who we are becoming. And, I just, you know, quickly want to say that there was this was a while back, and there was someone when I was teaching a yoga class, and somebody was in the class, and after came out and said, Lisa, that was amazing. And I was like, oh, thank you. And she said, you don't remember me. And I looked, and she said, I worked with you 20 years ago. And then I remembered her. And she said, she gave me a compliment, and she said, you always had a lot to offer me. And she said, but not like this. She said that class really touched me, and the things that came out of your mouth. She said, you changed so much. Like, how in 20 years did you become this person? And I'll tell you what, my eyes filled up, and I said to her, I'll say what I told her the story about, what they do in Japan. And I said, what you see before you, I said, are so many breaks, so many cracks. And I said, I learned to line them with gold. And I said, that's what you're seeing. And I really believe that when we can learn to use, whatever life challenges us with, rather than letting the challenges use us, if we can learn to use them, to become, I guess our most loving best selves.
And if you're interested, that practice is called wabi sabi, and there are therapeutic groups that use wabi sabi work in healing with grief, and bringing in objects and mending them as a
Well, that's
metaphor.
a fun name anyway. That you
That's
could,
fun, fun. Wabi sabi, yes.
but it
So
makes
wabi
me think
sabi.
of wasabi.
I have to tell you, I think that's the title of our next podcast is wabi sabiing life and loss, maybe. So that will be part two of this. So this is part one of our conversation on processing grief and loss. So join us next week as we explore part two and we dive a little bit deeper into this topic and talk about how we can become better, how we can grow through our pain, and
How
how to
to.
use these experiences to wabi sabi ourselves. And as always, check out our website, globalholisticwellness.com. If you have any questions, you can drop it in the chat box below if you're watching us on YouTube, or if you're listening to us on Spotify, you can go ahead and email us at globalholisticcoaching@gmail.com. And we get our topics from you guys, so keep the topics coming. And if you haven't already, please like and subscribe to our channel. It helps us keep this content coming, and it helps keep the content free. See you.
And if you have any tips for dealing with grief and managing grief, please, leave the comments for others, because, we're here to pitch in and help one another.
Absolutely. See you next week.